So Ian Swart is the Assistant Director and Archivist for the Museum of the Great Plains in Lawton. He previously worked at museums in Tulsa and Woodward, so thank you so much for coming to Southwest Oklahoma and Lawton, for being here. Growing up in a family of storytellers, he is passionate about preserving and sharing Oklahoma history. His love of the past manifests itself in gardening, canning, and quilting. He collects antique sewing machines, photographs of overall-clad subjects, and chamber pots. He did say that for those who stick around today and after dinner, we'll get to see the museum a little bit. And as we are back here, he has one of the coolest offices in Lawton, and so maybe he will open up and let us peek in there too.
My chamber pot collection.
All right, so give it up for Ian Swart.
Thank you.
So it's really weird that D2 biological solution just came up in this last presentation. I used to be a member of a national organization called the Association for Gravestone Studies. Yes, there are organizations for all types of history nerds. And I had attended one of their national conferences in Connecticut years ago. And the fun bus trips on these would be, people would load up. We would go visit historic cemeteries, and people would pile out with their cameras and mirrors to reflect the sun to get a good picture of the inscriptions and whatever, just like kids in a candy store. But on this tour bus, I sat next to the guy who developed D2 biological solution, and I had done work to clean headstones and repair them and whatever, and that was a product that I used, and it was very cool to be able to sit with him and talk to him about that product. So anyway, so my presentation is going to be a little bit more nuts and bolts. I'm very glad that Dr. Janda was here this morning to kind of give an overview of the New Deal and to talk about Southwest Oklahoma a little bit. I grew up in Fletcher, Oklahoma, which is about 20 miles northeast of here. So moving back here and coming to work at Museum of the Great Plains was really like coming home. That tiny town gave me a very 1950s childhood in small town America. There were about 1,000 people who lived there. I graduated with 29 kids in my class. The other thing was that my grandparents lived in that town. And I was fortunate enough to see them almost every day. And so I grew up with this built-in history because they loved to tell stories about their childhood during the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. My grandmother, who's here in the center and the bottom, Luana, she grew up in Custer County and started to school at a place called Independence, which is now a little ghost town west of Thomas. She would talk about her early years. They did not have a car, just like Dr. Janda said. They were still using a horse and wagon. She talked a lot about what it was like to grow up on a farm without electricity, without running water. And just like Dr. Janda said, they were not living much differently than people in the 1830s were. They were still growing a garden for sustenance. They were still canning and putting food by because that's what you had to do to make it through the winter in those days. This is the first time in history of humanity that we no longer have to put food by because it's always going to be on the shelf. My grandparents never gave that up. They were still gardening, still canning, still quilting. My grandparents would not throw anything away. Little bits of wire. If my granddad got a new belt, he would take the old one and hang it up on a nail in the garage. Why are you doing that? Well, I might need a little piece of leather someday. If my bicycle got a new inner tube, he would hang the old one up because he might need a piece of rubber someday. Just crazy stuff. So my grandmother said that later on in the 30s they did have a car. I don't know how they were able to purchase one, but she said the only time they listened to the radio was on Saturday evenings. Her daddy would go out and get the battery out of the car, bring it into the house to power the radio, and they would listen to the Grand Ole Opry broadcast every Saturday evening. Now, a lot of FDR's fireside chats were on Sunday evenings, and so if they knew that that was going to happen, they would bring the battery in to listen to President Roosevelt. My great-grandpa Swart, this dapper dude on the left, and the overalls and sport coat and fedora, he was born in Germany in 1881. I was born in 82, so he would have been 101 if he was still living. He came to the United States at the age of 14 with his family, and they settled in Riley County, Kansas. They ended up coming to Washita County, Oklahoma in 1910 because even though Washita County had already been settled, there was still more available land for family members there. And so a large contingent of families from Riley County, Kansas came down to Washita County, Oklahoma. He was part of the agrarian socialist movement that was very popular in western Oklahoma, especially in the 19-teens and the 1920s. And a part of that socialist movement was the emergence of farmers cooperatives, and he was a founding member of the Rocky Farmers Cooperative in Rocky, Oklahoma, which is between Hobart and Cordell. That was in 1920. He served as the secretary for the co-op for a long time. He was on the Cotton Gin board, which was another co-op. He was on the county fair board, was a state board member of the Oklahoma Farmers Union for 18 years. Things were doing good. People in the community are doing things to benefit their members. He ends up losing their farm in 1937 because he can no longer pay the mortgage. And so they were forced to start renting farms around Rocky. And so that was a big, devastating thing in my family that was talked about for years and years and years and years. In 1938, rural electricity is coming to western Oklahoma. He is a founding member of the Kiowash Electric Cooperative and sat on their first board of directors. Kiowash covered Kiowa County and Washita County. That's where they got the name Kiowash. Kiowash no longer exists because they merged with Caddo Electric out of Binger, and now the company is called CK Energy. They still exist in that format. My grandpa, who was in the center, he graduated from Rocky High School in 1939. That summer, he joined a wheat harvest crew and followed the wheat harvest north all the way up into the Dakotas. When he got home, he needed a job, and so he went to work for the Kiowash Electric Cooperative, digging holes for poles for transmission lines along county roads. And the story that he told was about Thanksgiving Day in 1939. He had to work. His mother would prepare a sack lunch or a lunch box for him every day. He said when they arrived at work, there was a pickup truck, and you would stick your lunch box out in the bed of that truck. He said when lunchtime came, that truck would come and would drive real slow down the road, and all the boys in turn would step over and grab their lunch box. He said because it was Thanksgiving Day, his mother had made him a very special meal. She'd gotten up early that morning and made homemade fried chicken, and there was a piece of pie in his lunchbox. And he said, Ian, all morning long, all I could think about was that lunch. He said, I was the last man on the line that day, and I saw that truck coming, and I walked out toward the road, and I looked over into the bed of that pickup, and there was a lunchbox there, but it wasn't mine. So he said he took that lunchbox and he opened it up, and there was a cold piece of bologna and a dried biscuit. And that was his Thanksgiving lunch. And he said, Ian, I never did find out who ate my mama's fried chicken and homemade pie. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my own research. When we started talking about holding this symposium, I delved into it because I love history, and this is a good excuse to, research some new things. A work in progress, like what I did there. Ha ha ha. This is the 12-county region that I chose for this research project. It's very hard to decide what should be considered Southwest Oklahoma. Southern Grady County is not on this map, but it's like right over here north of Stevens County. To me, Southern Grady County is Southwest Oklahoma, but Northern Grady County, you're getting pretty close to the city, and that's not really Southwest Oklahoma. So it was difficult to come up with the region first and foremost. I have identified 507 projects right now. The WPA and the CCC were the big New Deal programs. There were precursors to the WPA. There was the Civil Works Administration. There was the Federal Emergency Relief Administration. There were local projects here in Comanche County that were being done under those programs. But as of now, most of my sites are from those two big ones. Now, I've got PWA on there, and Dr. Janda talked about those a little bit. The big difference between the Works Progress Administration and the PWA is the way in which people were paid. So the WPA is directly hiring men who are skilled and can work. They are paying their paycheck directly. The PWA, they were hiring contracting firms who would then hire the workforce and pay the employees. So that's the big difference between those two. So the information that I have been looking for all of these individual projects are obviously the location, the title of the project, the year it was built, which agency sponsored that program or paid for it, where the address is. If I didn't have a street address, I would put the legal land description, the cost. What's interesting is a lot of these projects, specifically WPA, they had to have a certain percentage of local dollars put in. It wasn't 100% federal dollars. So these, the cards like you see here, that is one of the original appropriations cards where it shows that this project was given approval, and it also lists the amount of the money put forth to each project. Now, in that 12-county area, these are the main categories, I would say, of different projects. And I was not surprised at all that schools and gymnasiums were the leaders, that there were more of those built than any other type of project. Lots of parks were put in the early years before the bigger construction projects were put forward. Teacherages is a term that we don't use very often anymore, but think of a parsonage where the church has a house that the preacher can live in. The school district would have housing that the teacher could live in. And that was a very common thing in Southwest Oklahoma back in the 30s. The armories, Amy talks about being in her armory in Edmond. I don't know why there was not one built here in Lawton in the 30s. There were armories put in Marlow, Duncan, Mangum, and up in Anadarko. The courthouses, I've got 5 on the project list, but the Comanche County Courthouse here in Lawton was the only courthouse proper that was built as a new courthouse. The other courthouse projects were additions or repairs. In Mangum, there was a WPA project to put a rock wall around the courthouse square. So even though I have them listed as courthouses, they may not be the actual buildings. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about specific local projects. I just mentioned the Comanche County Courthouse. It was built in 38 and 39. It lasted until urban renewal in the late 60s and early 70s when lots of Lawton's original downtown was torn down. And we also built a brand new courthouse, which you can see in the center photo. The new courthouse is there on the left, and the old courthouse, the WPA courthouse, is in the process of being torn down. The old courthouse was left standing long enough to move all of the county offices into the new building. And then they had an auction. I think they asked for sealed bids, and the newspaper article said that they were going to sell everything from the Venetian blinds to an elevator. And I think that was the first time I realized that the WPA courthouse actually had an elevator. Well, I don't know if you can see it, but there are still blinds hanging right here. So apparently they didn't have any takers for the Venetian blinds. It's sort of urban legend here in Lawton that the reason it took over 2 months to tear down the old courthouse is because of how well built it was made. And I have never been able to ascertain what the reasoning was for making a new courthouse in 1971 or 72. I don't know if it's because there were issues with the building or if they just needed more space, or hey, we've knocked down our old downtown buildings, we need a new modern courthouse to go with it. I don't know. Roosevelt Stadium was the original name of Ron Stevens Stadium, and that's where we're going to go this afternoon. It was dedicated in October of 1938. The one thing that surprised me about this project was that the seating capacity was 5,000 people. And if you drive by it today, you think, I don't know if that many people can actually sit in here, but that was the case. So this was Lawton High School's football stadium, and it was called Roosevelt until 1959. And then the name was changed to Ron Stevens Stadium. Ron Stevens, he worked with the Civil Works Authority and the FERA prior to the WPA. He grew up here in Lawton. He went to Lawton High School. I think he had training as an electrician and maybe had an electrical contracting firm. Very involved in civic affairs in Lawton. Well, during the Depression, he starts working for the CWA and the FERA. He becomes the 7th District Director for the WPA. Oklahoma was divided up into a number of districts. The Southwestern District was District 7. And apparently he was quite the mover and shaker. So when W.S. Key, who was the prior administrator, statewide administrator, resigned, everyone said, you want Ron Stevens to take over and be head of the WPA for Oklahoma. So I found a newspaper article from May of 1937 where they're announcing that Ron Stevens is going to take over as the statewide administrator. I'm going to read the first paragraph to you. Veritable human dynamo, proven executive, firm believer in the Rooseveltian theory of applied social security is Ron Stevens, the 46-year-old Comanche County man who is slated to succeed W.S. Key as state administrator of the Works Progress Administration for Oklahoma. So he died in 58. Later in 1959, people started writing letters to the Lawton School Board saying, hey, we should change the name of the stadium as a way to honor Ron Stevens. And so that is just what they did. The road up Mount Scott has been mentioned already. Even though lots and lots of projects out in the Wichita Mountains were CCC projects, the road up the mountain was a WPA project. The road opened on Sunday, August 14th in 1938, and they said that there were 6,000 visitors that drove up the mountain that day, which was pretty surprising. Another thing that I found, and I have not had time to chase this down, But apparently when they were blasting out and making the road, whatever, there was a huge granite boulder that was in the way that they ended up bringing down the mountain. They loaded it on a rail car, and they shipped this boulder to Pocatello, Idaho. And it is now the cornerstone of a U.S. Biologic Department depot or something. I need to look into this. But basically, they shipped it up there in its raw form and then had it turned into this huge cornerstone for a building in Idaho. I'd love to know if it still exists. The Holy City has been mentioned. We're very fortunate here at the museum to have some really cool photos of a lot of these projects. One thing that was surprising about this one was that there were 200 state and national WPA directors who came for that first pageant. And of course, all the CCC projects. I have seen two different numbers for the dams and lakes that were built. I've seen 26 and I've seen 29, so I haven't actually gotten a map and counted them all, but it's either one of those numbers. Months ago, when I was starting this research, my colleagues probably got tired of me talking about the lack of resources and information about specific CCC projects in the mountains. I had scoured the internet, I can't find them anywhere. I don't know what I'm going to do. And then about 10 days ago, how many of you work in museum collections or have worked in museum collections? Derek is back there. You think you know what you have in your museum collection? You really don't. I found typewritten monthly reports by the camp's superintendent at one of the camps out in the Wichita Mountains. And these reports run from January of 36 into the spring of 42. And not only is there specific information about each project and the progress that they had made that month, but there are about 20 photographs included for each month. And I have started cataloging these and putting them into our online collection, but I'm thinking that there are over 1,500 photographs in this collection. Mind-blowing to me. So now I am going to give you tools that you can go back to your site and research WPA and CCC programs in your area. First off, we've got Sarah from SHPO here. I'm going to plug your site. So back in the 80s, there were surveys that were done all across Oklahoma. They were doing field research, trying to find properties that might be eligible to be put onto the National Register. This map that they have here shows those original WPA districts for the state of Oklahoma. This is a very good starting point. If you're just wanting a list of the projects that were in your county or your city, this is a good place to start. That card that I had on here earlier, the appropriations card, I think they actually call them project application reference cards, and these are found on the National Archives site. They have been digitized. They are not searchable. So you have to look for record group 69, and then the series, you have to search for that too to be able to pull these up. These are organized by state and then county in year order. So Ohio, some of their projects are on the same reels as Oklahoma. So you really just have to wade through all of the Ohio counties until you get to Oklahoma counties. But there is so much good information on these cards. A more local database is on OSU's library's website. There was a professor there back in the early 80s named Dr. David Baird. He did a lot of research. He was involved with a lot of those survey reports that were done through SHPO. He had photographed buildings all across Oklahoma in 1984. Right now there are about 1,300 photos from that specific project that are searchable and available online. Gateway to Oklahoma History is a phenomenal site. There are thousands of photographs, thousands of pages of Oklahoma newspapers, and also they have digitized all of the Chronicles of Oklahoma. And I did a search for WPA in the Chronicles yesterday just to see how many articles came up, and there were 272. A very good resource. And don't forget smaller institutions. There are museums and libraries all across this state that have collections related to the New Deal. We are actively working almost every day to add to our online presence. Yes, we are the protectors of all of these things, but our relevance is that we can provide access to those materials to researchers, to students, to authors, and I take that charge very seriously and want to connect people to those resources. This is a report that was done in the mid-90s. It was a project of Museum of the Great Plains where they researched rural school sites across southwest Oklahoma. Now, this isn't a specific New Deal project. However, it does give a lot of good information about when these rural school districts were in operation and also where they were located. So there were lots and lots of rural schools that were built as WPA projects. And this little book can be found, there is a digitized version on the OHS website. So here's a list of a few other websites. I'm not going to talk about them specifically, but this is how much of a nerd I am. I like to go home and watch oral histories on YouTube that the Oklahoma Historical Society has put up. There's so much good information there. Oklahoma Digital Prairie is another site, sort of like the gateway that's run through the State Department of Libraries. The Living New Deal is a site that came out of UC Berkeley, I believe. Lots and lots of good Oklahoma information on there. These New Deal posters that are everywhere, those can be found on the Library of Congress website. Most times they have high resolution files that you can download, and because they were government produced, there's no copyright restrictions or that sort of thing. CCC Legacy is a good website that will give you a list and location of a lot of the CCC camps around here. One thing I learned yesterday was that there were also she camps. Who has heard of those? So Mrs. Roosevelt, of course, was a champion of a lot of people, but she thought that there could be more that women could give to the New Deal and to the public good. And so she started a she camp as a woman's counterpart to the CCC. And at one point in time, across the nation, there were 90 of these women's camps. And I have not done any research, but if anyone else is looking for New Deal topics, that would be a fascinating one to look into those she camps. And of course, the Indian Pioneer Papers, if you're an Oklahoma historian, you're probably familiar with these. They're hosted on the OU Library website. While they do not address the New Deal specifically, they are part of a New Deal Writers Project, WPA Writers Project. Okay, so here are my observations. Not all New Deal projects are sexy. Sewage lines are not sexy. Sidewalks aren't really. But these are all things that were done to make the lives of people better. This little graphic about school lunches, that school lunch programs were something that came out of the New Deal. Now we just take it for granted that, there's going to be a hot lunch at school. My granddad used to talk about going to school and that all of the mothers in the community would take turns preparing lunch. And he always said he loved it when it was his mother's turn because she would make a big old batch of homemade chocolate pudding. Other projects that were done sort of on the county level include clothing distribution to needy families. The WPA was employing women to repair clothing to be handed out. They were teaching them how to make clothing to hand out. This is a weird one to me. I don't know what the fascination was with tennis courts in the 1930s. And there were quite a few of them that were installed in southwest Oklahoma. Here's a list of all the towns that were lucky enough to get a tennis court. I talked about rural schools a little bit. I was surprised at the sheer number of rural schools that were being built during the New Deal, because that is the same period of time when lots of these rural school districts were closing, when the rural schools were consolidating with other school districts, or they were no longer going to the one-room school and were going to a school in a proper town. The one-room school that we have on our grounds here closed in 1938, and all of the students thereafter went to school at Cache. In addition to the actual school buildings, they were also building cellars. And I thought this was a little strange until I really thought about it. There was no weather forecasting, there were no tornado alarms or alerts. And if you're sending your kids to spend 8 hours a day or whatever at a rural school out in the middle of nowhere, the only thing that they can do is look at the sky. You wanted your kids to be safe, and so many of these rural schools had storm cellars on the grounds. And a lot of times here in southwest Oklahoma, that's the only thing that's left, because the school building has been torn down or moved or repurposed or whatever. How many of you read the Hardy Boys growing up? Who remembers the case of the missing auditorium? I made that up. Dr. Janda listed off a list of buildings that were produced or built in Lawton, and he mentioned the Lawton Municipal Auditorium. It shows up all over the place. There is one of those WPA cards that say it was approved, that this thing is going to be built in Lawton. We've set aside this much money. The local community is going to come up with so much. I think it was 20,000, I can't remember. It shows up in other books that have been written about Oklahoma and the WPA. There are newspaper articles where they talk about hiring the contractor and that this thing is really going to happen. So I started looking on maps. Where was this thing? I talked to older folks in the community. They've never heard of it. So this became a mystery that I had to work on for several days until I found this article, and it was not easy to find. Even with digitized, fully searchable newspaper databases, this one was a tricky one to find. Basically what happened is they pulled the plug at the last minute. Because there had to be so much local money put into each project, they were going to have to vote on and pass a bond issue in Lawton to raise the public dollars for this. So it turns out that there were several school bond issues that were going to be on the same ballot. And the city fathers thought that they would be endangering the school bond issues if they also had this auditorium project on the same ballot. So they killed it a few weeks before the election. So even though on paper it looks like this was a major project in Lawton, it never existed. So of course, now that I have started this research, there are lots and lots of little rabbit holes that I'm going down. I want to include other types of projects besides buildings. We have a collection here at the museum that was donated by Barbara Scott, who had published a book about WPA murals in Oklahoma. Soil conservation, there's not much tangible to look at except those shelter belts my granddad would point out while we were driving down the road. A weird thing, it's not necessarily weird, but there was an FERA project here in Comanche County in 1934 where they were going to start 3 10-acre vegetable gardens. And this was going to be a project that they hired women to do the planting and the harvesting and the canning, I'm assuming to dispense to needy families. It's very distressing to run across racial issues in that time. The reason there were going to be 3 10-acre gardens in Lawton is because one was for white folks, one is for people of color, and one is for Hispanic people. I've only just grazed the surface of this and saw the mention of it, but this time period, all of these national programs, there is so much research that needs to be done. And there is no time to waste. This is the high school building in Apache, which is not too far from here, 20 minutes from here. That's 2 views from the same spot on Google Maps, Street View. They built a new high school years ago, and then they just decided we don't need the old one anymore, and so it's long gone. And I don't know if any of you watched the news this week, but Geary, Oklahoma, their WPA gymnasium burned down. And there are photos of that Dr. Baird has in his collection, but they're not the greatest. Document, photograph, write things down. Our future plans here at the museum are to create an artifact wish list. Things that we hope that local families still have in their dresser drawers and the tops of their closets. Things that we want to come into our collection here so that we can display them and to tell those stories. Because ultimately, what museums do is tell stories about people. Yes, we have really cool stuff, but we use that stuff to tell stories about real people. This is just an aside. If anyone else works in a repository or knows, this book on the left was published here in Oklahoma right before Ron Stevens became director of the state WPA. It showcases projects from 1935 to 1937. I do not know if there were other ones that were published later on that will list projects and showcase photographs of those projects for the later periods of the New Deal. If anyone has a lead on that, let me know. So, I think I'm way over time, but if any of you want to get together later and talk about Southwest Oklahoma and the New Deal, or Singer sewing machines or chamber pots or whatever it is, find me and we can chat. Thank you.